Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Hello and welcome to a very exciting bonus episode. Today I'm joined by Claire Lombardo to chat all about her new novel, Same as It Ever Was. For you lucky US folk, you'll be able to grab your copies now, and for UK folk, you can look forward to it next month when it is published by W&N. But for now, here is your taster. For anyone unfamiliar with Claire, she is a writer based in Iowa City, where she earned her MFA in fiction at the Iowa Writers' Workshop. Her short fiction has been featured in Playboy, Barrel House magazine, Little Fiction, and Longform, to name a few. Her debut novel, The Most Fun We've Ever Had, was an instant New York Times bestseller, a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2020, and is currently being adapted into a TV series by Reese Witherspoon herself. Her new novel, Same as It Ever Was, is an incredibly moving and life-affirming family saga, and I'm thrilled to get to chat to Claire all about it. Welcome, Claire, to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
It's a delight to have you. I was just telling Claire before we started recording how bereft I felt after finishing Same as It Ever Was. I am so sad that it's over. But how are you feeling about it coming out into the world soon?
I feel good. I feel I'm still at a stage where it's very bizarre to me that people are reading my book because I spent so much time alone with it. But it's really exciting. I've been working on this book for a long time, so I'm excited to find it an audience, ideally.
I can imagine. I am actually slightly behind because I haven't had the pleasure of reading The Most Fun We Ever Had yet, and it's been sat on my TBR pile for the longest time. I don't know why I've not got to it yet, but everybody says to me whenever I tell them that I've not read it yet, they're like, "Are you for real? Like, it's incredible." And I'm always hearing about it. So I leapt at the chance when I saw you had a new book coming out to ask you to come on the podcast because, yeah, I've only ever heard good things. And I was looking at your Goodreads reviews before, and I've seen people giving reviews just for really good, really good. People giving reviews just because they were purely excited about the fact that you had a new book coming out, and they were reviewing it already
nice.
and saying they were just putting star reviews and saying like, "We love Claire." Like,
Oh, that's nice. Okay.
I think like as far as Goodreads reviews goes, that's probably the best I've seen in terms of
I'll take those. I
yeah.
never look because I am afraid. That is a place where authors should not go.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
very
but
happy to
I
hear
think
that.
you'd be fine going there because that's all
Okay.
it just seems to be positive stuff. So, but I have to start this episode by asking you what you are currently reading.
Yeah, so I'm reading two books at the moment. One isn't out yet, so I feel like a jerk saying that. Then I'll tell you the one that I'm reading that is out. I just got a galley of the new Elizabeth Strout novel, whose title I cannot think of, which I'm very embarrassed to say, but it comes out in August. And I normally don't, I work in a bookstore and I'm a writer, so I get a lot of early copies and I don't normally geek out over them, but that's one that I'm really excited to read because she is one of my favorites. And I also am listening to the audiobook of James by Percival Everett, which is just unreal. It's so good. So those are the two that I'm reading at the
I'm
moment.
hearing so many great things about James.
Oh, it's so good. You should read it. And the audio is terrific. I don't know what the UK audio is like. I'm sure it's also
I'll have to
terrific
give it
if
a
there is
try.
UK audio. Yeah.
Do you listen to a lot of audiobooks?
I do during phases of my life when I'm driving more. So I've been traveling more recently. So I like listening to them in the car and when I'm working around the house and in my garden, which I'm now doing more of. So I do really like them. Yeah.
I've actually never listened to an audiobook.
No
I
way.
know, I
And
know. I
you're a
feel like it's like,
podcaster.
I
Are
know.
you opposed to it or is it
I
just
don't think I'm opposed to it because you'll find me listening to podcasts more than I listen to music. So I don't think it's that
interesting?
I'm not interested in listening to it, but I do
Mm,
really like having a physical copy. It's
yeah.
like I feel like if there's a book that I want to read, I want to be able to hold it in my hands. I'm very specific about that, and it's like, no, I need to own a copy of that book. I need to be able to see it in my in my
That
house on my
makes,
shelf.
yeah.
So I don't know whether it's a case of whether I should try listening to something that I've already read so that I know that I've got it. But
Oh,
yeah,
that's a good idea.
I'm not kind of sure where to start with that. I don't know why I've never listened to an audiobook. It's so strange. And I feel like a lot of it, like I'd be able to get through a lot more books if I did the audio
Hmm.
version as well. So maybe that's something I need to try.
Maybe so. Or maybe it's just not your thing. I don't know. I also
Maybe.
like having a physical
A
copy of
physical
things. So
copy, yeah.
that makes sense to me.
Especially
Yeah.
when it's got a good cover. I'm like, I need to own that. I
Uh-huh.
need it. And the cover of Same as It Ever Was is so gorgeous.
Oh, thanks. I've got it behind me. The
I
UK cover
know.
is the same with slight, I don't
It
know if
is,
you,
yeah.
there's slight color differences in the houses if you look very closely, which I'm kind of
Oh, I
excited
didn't know
about.
that.
I
I've
know.
got the US copy. I've got very lucky.
Oh, great.
I'm very curious about something with US books, and I really noticed it recently, is
Mm,
that it always says a novel on the book cover. Do you know why
yeah.
that is?
Does it not do that in the UK?
No.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's just for marketing purposes. I think it's
Huh.
to differentiate a novel versus a story collection versus a memoir. If you have a book that kind of toes the line between, if it's like a novel and stories
Hmm.
or if it's autofiction, you'll often just see they won't put anything. It'll just say the title. But I think I'm guessing it's just for marketing or categorization purposes, but I don't know. It's interesting though. Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a long discussion about, well, this isn't a visual medium,
No, no,
right?
no.
Okay, so I won't show you, but we had a long discussion about where to put the phrase a novel on the cover, which anyway,
Oh,
the minutia that you get into is
I know.
unexpected.
I don't know why I'm asking you about that. It's
Oh no, I didn't
of all the
realize it wasn't
questions I
like
could be asking you about, I'm just so curious about it. And I've never
yeah.
thought to ask anybody, and I don't know why. And I think, like, yeah, it's just so
I'll
strange that it's
ask
not a
the
thing
next time
here.
I'm in the bookstore. I'll see if I can get you a
Yes.
better answer.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
Now, I mentioned in my intro about the successes of your debut novel. What has that journey been like for you, and how much can you tell us about the adaptation of that book?
Sure, yeah. It's been really wild. This book has had, I mean, I've heard people say this book has had sort of like a slow burn. I don't really feel that way exactly, though I do think, so the book was picked in April of 2024 by Reese Witherspoon's book club, but it came out in June of 2019. So it kind of had this second life very recently, which was really exciting. So I feel very lucky the book came out shortly before COVID. So I got to tour for it. I got to, it got to have legs that I think a lot of books that came out during the pandemic did not get to have. So I feel very fortunate for that. But then it kind of took on this sort of interesting virtual life during COVID. I was doing a lot of, in the UK and the US, a lot of virtual book clubs, which ended up being just a really fun way to connect with readers that I otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten to connect with. And the adaptation side of it has also given it, this new life. I wrote a pilot for the series that didn't end up happening years and years and years ago. So that was a lot of fun. And now it is in the hands of Hello Sunshine, Reese Witherspoon's production company. And so I'm not involved in the writing of that. So I'm really excited to see what
Right,
they'll
okay.
what they'll do with that. Yeah.
That's
So
interesting. What was it like when you were working on the pilot? Like how does it kind of differ writing in novel form to writing for screen?
yeah, I mean it was a lot of fun. It was definitely a learning experience, but I'm a writer. I love dialogue. It's one of my favorite things to write. There's a lot of dialogue in both of my books, and I think my view of fiction writing is quite scenic. I see things in terms of as an actor you might appreciate just sort of like the
Yes.
blocking where people are in rooms and what they're doing
Hmm.
with their hands and what their faces look like. So I'm always very cognizant of that when I'm writing. So in some ways, the transition to writing for screen was a pretty smooth one. But when you're writing for screen, you don't have the benefit of interiority, which is also something that I love and rely on in fiction. So I think it helped my dialogue writing in that when you're writing for a script, the dialogue is doing, I don't want to give a percentage, but a large percentage of the
Yeah.
work in telling the story. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I would happily do it again someday. Yeah.
I'm just really interested because you said about, you loving dialogue and seeing things as scenes. And Like you said, I'm an actor, and dialogue is like my favorite thing to
Hmm.
read. So, where do your stories kind of start for you? Does it start with a line? Does it start with a scene? Is it an image? Like, what? Where does it start?
That's a good question. I have had things start with a line of dialogue. Often I overhear something just when I'm walking around. And I have my students, in normal times. I didn't do this during COVID, obviously, but I have them go out and just eavesdrop on people's conversations. Not people that they know. I try to keep it as ethical as possible, but because I think that can be a really great starting point. Because people say really weird stuff,
Yeah.
and taken out of context, you can take a line of what is maybe a completely innocuous conversation and
Hmm.
turn it into something fun. I will say that with Same as It Ever Was, that novel started for me with Julia's voice. So not a particular line, but just this character. I mean, her voice came to me pretty much as you see it on the page. She's
Yeah.
a very voicey narrator. She's very neurotic, I guess. I don't know if maybe that's more negative than I want it to be, but she's got a lot of opinions. She's got a
Hmm.
lot of anxiety. And so Julia's voice definitely is what started the book for me. And with The Most Fun We Ever Had, it was the voice of Marilyn, the mother figure in the novel. So I'm very attached to, a narrative voice that I can easily get behind and that I can write with ease as
Yeah.
well.
Julia has such a strong voice in the book. And I mean, I've already said to you, but I can't stop thinking about the characters. I finished it last night and I feel like these are going to be characters that I'm going to be thinking about for the longest time. Maybe we should start, if you wouldn't mind, by giving our listeners a feel for the book. So, would you mind talking them through what Same as It Ever Was is about?
Sure, yeah. So Same as It Ever Was is about a woman named Julia Ames. When we meet her at the beginning of the novel, she is in her late 50s. She is, for all intents and purposes, very happily married to a very nice man. She has two grown-ish children who are doing, again, pretty well, both of them. She has a dog who is based on my dog.
I've met your
Uh,
dog, and your dog is
you
very cute.
She's the best. Yeah, she's judging me behind my computer screen right now. But she lives in the suburbs of Chicago. She has what appears to be a very happy life. And then she goes to the grocery store and she runs into a woman named Helen who's in her 80s. And Helen is a woman who Julia not only never expected to see again, but actively hoped to never run into
Mhm.
again. And you find out why later on in the book. But that sort of chance encounter makes Julia start thinking about her life differently. So we follow Julia through this, a few months in her present arc life, but then we travel into the past, not chronologically, to kind of see where Julia came from. So we see Julia's early days of motherhood. We see the days when she met her husband. We see Julia as a teenager with her own very difficult mother, and we see her early childhood as well. So it's kind of a woman's life story told sort of in reverse. How is that? Was
Wonderful. It is so cleverly done though, because it feels like a very ambitious thing to do because you have these two sort of stories of Julia's life running alongside each other. So we're
Mhm.
kind of going through a past but going through a present at the same time. And I wondered how you went about plotting that out. Now I can see behind you and
Oh
you've got
yeah.
you've got your board behind you with all lots of
Mhm.
post-it notes and things on you. Is that how you go about plotting out your stories?
Yeah. So yeah, my first novel too was very complicated to structure. And Same as It Ever Was I can't tell you how many different shapes this book took before I found the container that it's currently in. So yeah, I have a very large board of post-it notes behind me. And what I don't do this until I have a full draft of a novel. I don't outline ahead of time. I don't plot things out before I've written them. But once I've written the whole book, I do a scene per post-it note and then I sort of lay everything out. And that helps me see it visually. It helps me really easily move scenes around and see, could I get away with putting this scene before this scene, this
Mhm.
other scene that, and it allows you to kind of play around with decisions that might not be the most logical from a narrative sense. And it also can, I don't know, it's helpful for me to see, are we dwelling for too long in one particular plot line? Or in the case of my first book, are we dwelling too long with one particular character? Because that book had multiple narrators. So yeah, it's become a really fun and very important part of my writing process. And with this book, it was really tricky because I tried telling the story chronologically. I tried telling it in these sort of large vignettes. I tried, as I did with my first book, having no through line and no sort of plot, which is an editor's nightmare. It's a reader's nightmare, it really is. Well, it's my nightmare as a writer. So this book, it took a lot of, I had to try a lot of different permutations before I found the one that felt true to what I was trying to do with the book and true to the story of the character.
It's really easy to follow both of the different storylines, in her past and her present. And I don't know if this is me being stupid, but I would have expected myself to get quite lost in that, but you don't at all. And I think it is also the way that you flesh out these characters, and it feels like they're so easy to follow because they feel so real, and it felt like I really knew them. And I did want to ask actually about the way you write your characters. How do you go about making them feel so real? I don't know if that's even a right way to ask it, but I don't know how else to ask.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Those were very nice things you just said. No, that's a good question. I love characters. I love characters. What an intelligent thing to say. No,
I mean, what I just said was not intelligent at all, so.
No, it's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer. I do a lot of kind of like extra work to get to know my characters, by which I just mean overwriting. So lots and lots and lots of scenes that didn't make it into the final book, and maybe had no place to begin with, but that kind of helped me get to know what character X would look like doing, thing Y or in situation Z or whatever. And so I do that just sort of across the board, whether I'm writing stories or novels or whatever. And with this book too, are you familiar with the Proust questionnaire?
Yes, yeah.
You are. Okay. My students are always asking me for writing exercises, and I don't do writing exercises. I don't do like character questionnaires, but I found the Proust questionnaire, which is essentially, I don't know, I can't remember if it's 20 or 30 questions, but it's essentially like, here's a question you could ask anyone at a dinner party, and the, answer would be revealing in some capacity. So I kind of made my own version of that, because I think my students they want to know, like, what's the secret? How do I make this happen? I have no idea. Most of my writing process is completely haphazard. But for this book, because I had a number of characters that you see at different points in their life and that you're spending a lot of time with, I really wanted to make sure I had a handle on who they were. So I kind of made my own questionnaire with things that are tells for me. So like, when this person texts, are they an LOLer or a ha ha ha? Or
It's important.
like their pajamas, right? I know it's very revealing about what kind of person you're dealing with.
So true.
Yeah. So I took, and that questionnaire is going to look different for everyone doing it, but I took things that were important to me and those things that I'm kind of like, you're doing that, so I know who you are. So that was just sort of a fun, maybe diversionary or procrastinatory thing I did with this book. But yeah, I think I just spend a lot of time with my characters, and I spend a lot of time thinking about them, and I really try to love them. I try to not judge them. I try to, Julia is a difficult character who I think that I know that some readers take issue with some of the choices that she makes. And I think I had to come at Julia from a point of absolute empathy and absolute, zero judgment, because I don't believe in bad characters in fiction. I believe that people make choices that may not benefit them, but I don't think it means that, anyone is all bad or all good. So I think coming at my characters from this point of, like there's in Same as It Ever Was, Julia's son has a new girlfriend who Julia is not particularly fond of. And with her, I had to make very, very, very sure that this character was not coming in as a villain. So I had, Julia's perspective on her, which isn't always very generous, but I had to have my perspective as Claire, the writer, be one that was generous and empathetic and, perhaps more, I don't know, expansive than her future mother-in-law's. Yeah.
Well, firstly, I'm going to just let our listeners know that if they were interested in what the Proust questionnaire is, I believe that the Shakespeare and Company podcast did this questionnaire on the writer Dolly Alderton, I think, if I remember rightly. So if they want to kind of know what that is, they can go listen to that. But one thing I was interested in about Julia is because she is this kind of complicated woman, but I mean, I don't know many women that aren't complicated. So it feels just like real and nuanced and human. And I think, that's why she felt so real to me. And like, I knew her. And at the end of the book, I was like, what do you mean I'm not going to see her again?
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, but she does feel so real. But one thing that really resonated with me about her is how she kind of feels inadequate, and that can relate to her as a mother or her as a partner. And there's a scene in particular that I'm thinking of, and they're at their friend's house, and this is when we're looking back on their past together, and they're at the friend's house, and their friend is pregnant, and Julia's kind of looking at her and their life and their home, and she's like, why does my life and my home not look like this? And she kind of takes the piss out of it at first, and she makes a joke out of it, but then thinking about it, she's like, is there something wrong with me because I don't have that, I don't look like that, my life doesn't look like this. And I
Mm.
wanted to know, like, what interested you in kind of writing about this particular feeling, because I don't know if it's just specific to women or where that comes from.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I don't know. I think, it's probably not specific to women, but God, if it's not,
Yeah.
very prevalent for women, right? I
Yeah.
think that we are very good at, I mean, women are more observant. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
It's a,
No,
it's
I
a
think
hill
it's
I will
true.
die on. Yes.
Yeah.
Women are the more observant species. But I think that makes room for, a greater degree of social comparison for sure. But I think there's also, all sorts of societal expectations and societal pressures around what our lives are supposed to look like, around having children or not having children, and what that means about you as a person and how people perceive you. And those are things that, I mean, I think about them all the time. My friends think about them all the time, and I've thought about them differently and from different angles and to different degrees at different phases in my life. And my relationship to all of those things has changed as I've gotten older. So it's just something that I find really interesting. And for someone like Julia, who kind of has never felt like she fits in anywhere and isn't sure she wants to have children, and has difficulty connecting to people, and has had sort of fraught, difficult relationships with men throughout her, teens and 20s, until she meets her husband. It felt like a natural thing to explore
Hmm.
via that kind of character who doesn't really care about conformity, but also she kind of does.
Yeah. And she
Yeah.
she does go on to have children, and you represent this sort of side of motherhood that is, she has a real struggle with early motherhood. It's very
Mm.
difficult for her, and I don't feel like that's represented very much. I feel like I'm starting to see it more in books. I know that Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, that's recently come out, and it's on the Women's Prize list, and that's about
Mm.
like how difficult motherhood can be. Why did you want to represent those struggles of early motherhood?
Because, well, I think, like you said earlier about Julie is difficult, but she's not especially more difficult than anyone else. I
Yeah.
think that a lot of, well, I don't know. I do not have children, but I think a lot of the not so rosy thoughts that Julia has about motherhood are thoughts that a lot more people have than we'll
Hmm.
talk about.
Yeah.
And we live in sort of this era where people curate their appearances for social media, or for, their kind of the outward projections of themselves that are probably very different than what their actual lives look like. And so I think I was interested in, yeah, going there with a character who doesn't, feel the things that maybe she's supposed to be feeling, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's, again, there's a lot of societal impositions placed on us as women, and we all have, the thoughts that we project about those into the world, and the thoughts that we're afraid to tell anyone. And so it
Yeah.
was, when you have a character who you're really deep in their point of view, you have I say, the pleasure of seeing the really dark parts of their psyche.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
Julia is someone who, spends a lot of time in her own head and second guesses herself a lot. And so it was fun to be able to explore, the kind of less pristine or less palatable or
Hmm.
Instagram worthy
Yeah.
thoughts.
I was listening to an interview actually that you did with I think it's called the
Uh,
Shit No One Tells You About Writing
oh
podcast.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Yes,
was
I
it was
love
from
that
a few
podcast.
years ago. It was great. It's such a good podcast. And I think the host said something like, I don't know if this quote was from her directly or she'd found it somewhere, but she said, books are like mirrors. You can only see in them what you already have in yourself.
Yes.
And I thought that was so interesting because all the parts of her feeling inadequate and her kind of not being this palatable person, it's all sort of feelings that I've felt about myself before, and it really resonated with me. So yeah,
Mm.
I really loved that you wrote that, and I loved that you wrote about the more difficult sides of early motherhood. I've been reading a lot about it recently because I'm 29 now, and I'm sort of considering about whether I want children in my life yet, that sort of thing. And it's the time when everybody's asking me when I'm going to have kids, and
Mhm.
I'm trying to like actively read as much as I can from all the different experiences. And I think, we're not sort of given the full idea of what motherhood looks like sometimes.
Yeah.
We're often shown these shiny, glowing portrayals of motherhood, and that's not how it always is. So I
Hmm.
think this representation is really important, and I really liked that about her. But I wanted to ask, because both of your books have sort of long-standing marriages at the centre of them, and I wanted to know what interests you in that dynamic rather than say, a relationship at the very start.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer. I've been asked that question so many times and I don't have
Sorry.
one. No, oh no, I didn't mean it like that. No, it's a very good question. And it is something that is present in my work that's not present in a lot of other. I mean, it's much more common to see fraught marriages or disastrous relationships
Hmm.
or, headed for divorce marriages, whatever. But I have been drawn, at least in this sort of era of my writing life, to having these really strong relationships at the core. And I don't know. I don't know if it's just that I'm like a conflict avoidant person who likes to have this sort of like comforting space to retreat to in my fiction. I know with my first book, The Most Fun We Ever Had, I didn't even really realize that it was unusual to have this kind of really solid marriage at the core until some of my classmates started pointing it out to me when I was a grad student. And then it sort of became, once I sold the book, it kind of became how we were pitching it. It was sort of
Hmm.
like, this is a novel about a happy marriage, like, strap in. And so I don't know. I was working on these books simultaneously. I started writing Same as It Ever Was when I was editing The Most Fun We Ever Had. So I don't know if that kind of fictional conceit was still in my head when I started working on my second book. But I do find it's kind of an interesting challenge, which I also
Hmm.
like as a writer. It's sort of conflict is easy to write, I
Hmm.
think, because all you have to do is have a character do something bad, and then they're going to have to do something else bad to cover up the first bad thing, and then they're going to have to lie. But, I mean, it just sort of snowballs in a way that's really conducive to easy writing, in my opinion. But when you have something solid that isn't going to break, it becomes really fun to kind of like throw things at it or,
Yeah.
throw it off a building and see if you can get it to crack. And so I had fun with that in Same as It Ever Was, taking this pair of people that struggles quite a bit, but
Hmm.
really love each other. And I know that people get annoyed with my male characters sometimes because they think they're too nice. And that I don't know where that comes from because that has not necessarily been my experience with men
Yeah.
particularly. But I really liked having Mark in Same as It Ever Was. Mark is lovely. Mark is a very kind man. He is a good man. But I had a lot of fun exploring how that might be kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well,
how it
he's
might
he's
be
also not perfect though. He's not perfect,
exactly.
and he makes
Yeah.
mistakes, and there are these moments of like small betrayals where he kind of admits the truth or something like that. And it's
Hmm.
those moments where I mean, I'm going back to your Goodreads reviews now, and I'm sorry,
Okay.
but somebody said something, and it's really stuck in my head, and it says it was so well written. I wish I could articulate this myself as well. But they wrote that you expose the universality of imperfections in this really beautiful, subtle way. And I just thought that
Mm.
describes your writing so perfectly because there are so many small imperfections in their marriage, but they love each other and they have each other, and it doesn't matter that these things have happened, because their relationship can outlast it all. And I think there's something really
Mm.
beautiful in that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that I'd read that because it was so nice.
Oh, thanks. No, I think that's a good point, and I think it's also like those small imperfections or the ways that they butt heads sort of accrete in a way that you're almost like you can't help but stay together because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
because you're linked by all of these like little, little dark times.
Yeah.
Some of them are quite big, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting. I like exploring imperfections in people. I'm very suspicious as a reader if characters are too good or too bad, or if
Me
I'm
too.
very clearly being nudged in a direction of like, this person's really great. And I'm like, I don't think I would want to hang out with
Don't
them.
let,
So
yeah, I'm always looking for the
yeah,
cracks. I'm like, where's this
exactly.
gonna fall apart? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I read that, and I don't know if this is right, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I read that you've previously worked as a social worker. Is that right?
Mhm. That's right. Yeah.
Do you feel that this has had any sort of influence on your writing of family dynamics?
I do. I do. Yeah, I was training to become a therapist when I started writing my first novel.
Wow.
And I think there's a lot of overlap between my life as a writer and my life as someone who thought, they wanted to do mental health counseling. And I think the bulk of that overlap is just fascination with other people and an interest in what we were just talking about, looking at people kind of holistically and
Hmm.
not defining someone by, even though I said I define someone by what pajamas they wear, if they say LOL or ha ha ha. I do those things on a small scale, but I do try to look at people, kind of in a broad sense, and look at where they came from or what might be influencing why they're acting the way that they're acting at any
Hmm.
given point. And so I think, working with clients, being exposed to people's very intimate stories, none of which, for the record, I took or appropriated or
Yeah.
use in my fiction in any way, but I think the act of listening and the act of kind of helping people make sense of their own narratives very much informs who I am as a writer. And, yeah, I think my interest in people drew me to both careers. I think I am better suited to the career where I get to be alone in my house with my dog, making up stories. I found I'm someone who very much, I'm kind of I'm a sponge for other people's quote unquote energies. I don't want to get too
I'm the
like, woo,
same. I'm
but
the same. I
yeah,
get
it's
it.
exhausting.
It
Yeah.
is, it is, it is.
So
And I don't know how I worked in hospitality for, I mean, I'm still working in hospitality now, but I did have a breather from it because it got too much,
yeah, I'm sure.
absorbing that energy. And often it's negative energy when you're working in sort of customer facing
Mhm.
scenarios. But I think, it's so interesting that that work informed you as a writer because I feel like working in hospitality has helped inform me as an actor because it's seeing
Mhm.
the way people interact with each other that's kind of helped me understand like dynamics and certain relationships, and I can have observations about people in the way that I wouldn't when it's just interaction with family or friends, say. So I find all that
Absolutely.
stuff so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that you get exposed to the gamut working in
You
hospitality.
really do.
Like,
You really
yes.
do. Yeah, it's a lot. I wanted to ask about one of my favorite dynamics, which is the mother-daughter dynamic. And I love the parallels in this story, not only between Julia and her daughter Alma, but also reflecting back on Julia with her own mother. What do you think makes the mother-daughter dynamic so powerful?
Gosh, I mean, I've been thinking about this lately because it is something I'm very drawn to writing about. I mean, I think any family dynamic is interesting because you have people who may not otherwise have chosen to inhabit the same
Hmm.
space or, spend their lives together. But I think that mother-daughter relationships are that times
Yeah.
150. I mean, there's just so much to be mined there. And I think, in Same as It Ever Was, it was just so much fun to there's, as you said, there's these three generations of women. There's Julia, who's kind of in the middle, and then her teenage daughter, and then her mother. And I just had so much fun exploring, what gets passed down, what doesn't, and the perception that I think all of us have of my mom did that. Well, I'm never going to do that. And then you hear yourself one day and you're like, oh,
Hmm.
I am my mother. And sometimes you're happy about that and sometimes you're not. But
Hmm.
I do think that that is a universal thing. And I do think that applies to, mother figures as well. It might not be your actual mother depending on your closeness or its opposite. But there's just so much fodder. And I think, with teenagers especially,
Yeah.
Alma was just so much fun to write because she's just kind of awful, but also
Yeah.
like she's a 17-year-old girl. So I
Hmm.
always loved her. I always had a lot of affection for her, even when she's being kind of like, even when Julia wants to push her down a well, or I don't remember what the line is, but Julia is often very frustrated with her daughter. And Julia herself then, was very ill-behaved as a teenage. Well, ill-behaved is a judgmental phrase that I don't want to use, but Julia struggled in her teenage
Yeah.
years. So yeah, I just think that it's like my dream as a writer to have, you could just I love when you have characters that you could just lock in a room together and things would happen. They don't have to like go on some grand adventure tale. You can just, be sitting on the couch with your mom and get into a huge fight. I love that as a writer.
If you could choose one of the characters out of the book to sit down and have dinner with, who would it be?
Oh gosh. Helen, I think. Helen
Yes.
is Julia's, I don't know what to call her. She is a friend that Julia makes Julia's in her mid-30s. Julia is a young mom to a toddler, and she meets this kind of illustrious, has it all together, retired litigator who also had 5 children and lives in this fabulous house and is very glamorous. And I just had a lot of fun with that dynamic. And Helen was really fun to play with because I've had people, texting me as they're reading this book and they're like, is she a sociopath? Is she a villain? And then they read more and they're like, I still can't tell. And so Helen's intentions are not clear
Hmm.
throughout the book as you're reading, but I just had a lot of fun with her. And I really liked playing with that type of relationship because I am someone who has always had intergenerational friendships. I don't like identify them as that in my life, but I've always been friends with people who are quite a bit older than I
Hmm.
am in a really wonderful way. I feel so lucky that I have friends who, I mean, it's a unique and a really special privilege to have a friend who is, 20 or 30 years ahead of you and willing to share their intel with you.
Do
But
you
it
think that's
also
what it
can
gives
be,
you, that kind of relationship? Do you think it, like, what does it give you that's different from somebody being friends with somebody your own age?
I mean, I think it is part of that, sharing information, but I think it's also, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's, I don't know, she's 20 something years older than me and has a different career than I do, but has also had, is very successful in what she does. But she said, the thing I love about our friendship is that there's no competition here. There's
Hmm.
no, she said, I'm just purely happy for your successes. You're happy for mine. And I don't think that's always possible in your 30s with a
Yeah.
friend because there is that, as we were talking about earlier, that social comparison and
Hmm.
the societal pressure to, have your life look a certain way or have, reach certain milestones by certain ages.
Hmm.
And so I think having someone who's in a different station in life, you kind of remove those
Yeah,
social comparison aspects in a
that
way
makes
that can be
sense.
really, yeah,
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 it's that unintentional comparison, isn't it, about people your age? Competition,
yes,
sorry, it becomes a competition, but you don't want it to be, but it almost feels like it is. But you kind of fall
absolutely.
into that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've had very ugly thoughts about people, friends who I
Yeah.
love dearly because they have something that I want or because
Hmm.
they've done something that I feel like I should have done or whatever. I think it's just, you can go in with the purest of intentions and the utmost love for your friends. But I think that, or maybe that just happens to me. I don't, that certainly happens to me that I find myself with people who I really care deeply about and really, really like
Yeah.
resenting or feeling jealous of or whatever. So I don't know.
The joys of being a woman.
I know it's just a delight all the
It
time.
really is. It really is. I have to ask because I am obsessed with an adaptation. If Same as It Ever Was, I'm saying this purely because I loved Helen's character so much. If Same as It
Hmm.
Ever Was ever to be adapted, is there an actor that you think would be great to play
Oh
her?
God. I haven't thought about this yet. Do you have someone in mind?
I was thinking Meryl
Oh
Streep.
my God, that was the first name that came to my head. Because someone was just saying that about my first book too, having Meryl Streep play Marilyn the mother. Yeah, I could see a Meryl Streep. I
I
was
could see
definitely
it.
thinking of someone with that kind of like breezy linen
Yes.
tunic, like nice hair energy.
I can see it. I can completely
Yeah,
see it.
yeah.
And I hope that there will be an adaptation of Same as It Ever Was one day. But for now, I'm very excited about The Most Fun We Ever Had being adapted. And I'm very excited whenever I finish a book and I know that the writer's got a backlist. I'm always very
Oh,
excited that I can go back and read something of theirs. So I'm kind of glad in a way that I've not read The Most Fun We Ever Had yet because I've got that privilege now, which is very
oh,
exciting.
thank you. That's so nice.
we are coming towards the end of the interview, and I'm so sad about it. What is next for you?
God, I don't know. I have no idea.
This book hasn't even come out
Um,
yet. Why am I asking?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I have started working on another book, but it's difficult to I like to have multiple projects going on at once, but it's really hard to have your head so deeply in, I'm very much in the publicity phase of same as it ever was right
Yeah.
now. So it can be really hard to shift gears. It's also just really hard because I've spent 5+ years with these characters, and suddenly it's like I just have to stop hanging out with them and find new people to, it's weird. But I felt that way with my first book, and I figured it out. So yeah, I'm teaching, I'm writing, I'm working in my garden. I'm just sort of
Yeah, I feel
taking
like you
it
need
one
to
day at
kind
a
of
time. Yeah,
decompress after that because 5 years
yeah.
is a really long time to be
It is
working on
a really
something.
long.
So it's nice to,
Yeah.
you should treat yourself.
Thank you.
You deserve a holiday.
Thank you. I will take that.
Before I let you go, and before I ask for my final question, which is a recommendation, your books are both family sagas or sit within that. What are some family saga novels that you have loved?
Ooh, one of my favorite books of all time is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. Have you read that?
I've not.
Go read it now. Read it before you read The Most Fun We Ever Had.
Okay.
It's so good. I like scare. So I work in a bookstore very, very, very part-time, and this young woman came in a couple weeks ago, and she had just read The Secret History is really big, I
Yes,
think, on like book talk right now.
it
And I
is. Yeah,
love that
yeah.
book. I've read that book, 10 times. But she came in and she said, I just read The Secret History. It wrecked me. What do I read next? And I got so excited talking about Middlesex that I think I like frightened her. Um, and she didn't buy it. I did not do my job, but Middlesex is, God, it's so good. It is a multi-generational family saga. It begins in Greece, and then the bulk of it is set in Detroit, Michigan. And then I think it ends in Vienna. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've read it, but it's just, I mean, it's so rich and beautifully written, and you leave that book. I mean, I still think about those characters as though I know them. So that's a book that I highly recommend. What are some other family sagas that I like? Anne Tyler, anything that Anne Tyler has written. The Amateur Marriage is fabulous. Now, of course, I'm forgetting that I've ever read a book in my life. I know that there are others that I love. Olive Kitteridge, Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kitteridge novels, the Lucy Barton novels, any books that let you kind of spy on a family are
Mhm.
just I just derive so much enjoyment from that. So that is yeah, those are a handful of them. But
Those are
please go
great
read Middlesex.
recommendations.
Thank you.
I will definitely be going to order a copy of that as soon as this interview ends.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
you've sold it to somebody.
Great. Okay. I'm glad I'll recoup my commission. Yes.
Finally, I like to round off our episodes by asking for a recommendation. So I'm sorry to do this to you, but what have you got for me?
Oh gosh. Okay, I have a recommendation. And I wonder if I believe the writer is South African, and this book had sort of a resurgence maybe like 10 years ago because I think Maria Semple said something about it, but it's called Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Trapito.
Oh my
Have you
gosh,
read this?
I've not, but I've got it sat on my shelf and I've heard
Oh,
so much about it.
it's so good. I mean, it's such a sort of like lovely little hidden gem of a novel. And then I did the thing too, like you were talking about backlist. I read this book and I loved it. And then her books I don't think they might be out of print in the US. I had to work to find her other books. And I did, and I read all of them. And a number of them are these sort of lovely coming of age as a woman narratives. And Brother of the More Famous Jack is about a young woman who I believe it's like on a weekend, she goes with this older man that she is in a situation with to this house out in the country, and the husband I think he's a literary critic, and his wife is this sort of like beautiful waifish, sort of out there woman, and they have like 900 children. I don't remember how many kids they actually have, and they have these sort of gorgeous teenage sons, and then she's pregnant with another one, and so it's just this kind of like very motley but also sort of glamorous life out in the country. And the protagonist, whose name is escaping me, ends ends up having kind of unique relationships with both this mother, with some of the teenage sons, with the husband in a sense. But it's a very, I don't know, there were so many moments, and I read it in my mid-20s. There were so many moments in that book where I just felt so seen, I guess. Is that the phrase that the kids are using? But I felt so sort of recognized and so validated by, the confusion of being a young woman and the messiness and the awkwardness and the discomfort sometimes. So it's such a good book. I highly recommend it.
So excited to read it now.
Oh, good. Yeah, read that before my other one
Yes.
too.
No, I must read the most one we ever had. I'm so excited. Thank you for your recommendations and for this wonderful interview. It's been such a pleasure to chat to you. But where can our
Likewise.
listeners find you on social media?
Oh God. I'm trying to
Sorry.
remember what my handles are. I believe my Instagram is at Claire_Lombardo, and
Mhm.
my Twitter, which I never use and isn't even called Twitter anymore,
No,
right? But I
we
think,
forget, we ignore that.
okay. And Twitter's a bigger thing in the UK than it is in the US, isn't it?
Is it?
I don't know.
I
I
didn't
feel
know that
like
was a
my
thing.
British publisher uses Twitter far
Yeah,
more than,
it's still, I thought it was gonna crash and burn when it became X,
right?
but people are still using it, so
Okay. Yeah, my Twitter is at Claire Lombardo, I believe,
yeah.
but I never tweet.
I'll link
So
them in the show notes anyway, so
thank you.
our listeners can come and find you. And I'm so excited for people to read this because I just feel so lucky that I've got to read same as it ever was before it's even come out in the UK. I mean, we're in May now, but they're not going to get it till July, so I feel very smug about it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you liked it too. Yeah.
It
This
was
has been,
genuinely a wonderful book, so thank you for
oh,
writing
thank
it.
you.
Thank you for coming on the podcast as well. It's honestly, I've loved chatting to you so much.
Oh, you too. This has been so much fun. You are a delight to talk to. Yeah. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
And for our
Yeah.
listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so I can reach more of you. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And unfortunately, that is all we've got time for. So thank you so much for listening and goodbye.